Welcome to Athens, the capital city of the modern nation of Greece, and in terms of its contributions to art, architecture, philosophy, history, all parts of culture, the true heart of the miracle that was the golden age of classical Greece. Wherever you go in Athens today, if you look up, you are almost sure to see the city's chief landmark. It's called the Acropolis. That's a little compound word out of polis, meaning city, from which we get political and police and cosmopolitan and all kinds of other words. And acro, that little prefix there, meaning high city, as in acrophobia, fear of heights. This is the highest spot in the central area of Athens, though there are taller mountains and hills to look down on it, as we will see. But it's more than that. The Acropolis is the symbol of Athens. And above all, that Parthenon that crowns the Acropolis is the very emblem of classical civilization. To get to the Acropolis, you are going to pass through some of the old parts of the city. You are going to make your way from your taxi or your metro stop or your bus up through the scraggly trees to the ticket booth, buy your ticket, and then suddenly, having passed through a gate, there will be, rising in front of you, a vast flight of marble stair steps. Up those steps you must go, just as 2,500 years ago, the entire population of Athens would go in procession once a year, a day in the middle of summer that they called the first day of the month, Hekatombeon, roughly our July. The people went up to offer 100 oxen to their goddess, Athena. That's what Hekatombeon means, hekatos, 100, and the offering of those 100 oxen, a magnificent sacrifice to their goddess, and since she didn't like beef, this was actually believed, they left the bones and the scraps for her, and everybody had beef boiling away in their pots for some days to come. We're going to try to reconstruct in your mind's eye that grand procession. The first thing we need to do is realize that the stairs you're looking at don't match the ancient ones. There should be a ramp, something that would look to us like a handicap access ramp, running either up the middle or on one side of the steps. That ramp is for the oxen, for the cattle. They won't go up steps, and it is very bad karma. It's a very bad sign in the Greek mind if, at the moment of a sacrifice, an animal stumbles or acts in any way reluctant to go forward to the knife. They must seem to offer themselves, hence that ramp that led up to the gate at the top of the steps. I want to warn you, be careful on these steps. The Acropolis itself, that great rock, is a mass of very resistant limestone and in some places marble. Marble is made from the same limy sea creatures in ancient oceans as limestone, but it's undergone a heating process due to faults moving and friction within the earth. And the result is this finer, smoother rock. There are places on the Acropolis that are like a skating rink. I've never been up there, but that I saw somebody fall. The steps are made of that same marble. Please be careful. Watch your step. You don't want to be the Acropolis's next victim. As you look up, I want you to take in two things. First, to your right, looming above you, thrusting itself out from the mass of the Acropolis, is a great stone bastion. And on top of that bastion is the loveliest, most delicate little temple that I know in all of the classical Greek world. It is to the goddess Athena Nike. We still think of that with regard to sportswear, but it was chosen by the Nike company, that name, because it's the Greek word for victory. And this is Athena in her patronage of victories. Victory itself is always shown as a little angel figure with wings, usually carrying a wreath to put on the victor's head and blowing a trumpet to announce to the world the victory. The Athenians had won a battle in the 420s, and by about 420 BC, they erected this fabulous little temple with its beautiful relief sculptures and delicate Ionic columns in honor of Nike, Athena Nike. Second, look straight up the stairs, and you are looking at a grand gatehouse called the Propylaea. Pile are gates, propyle are gates in front of something. I just want you to realize that under those gates, so dazzling, so beautiful in their Doric columns and their fabulous marble, they are hiding from sight the Mycenaean palace gates from maybe 1,000 years before the time of Pericles and the classical Greeks of the 5th century who put up the Propylaea and the Parthenon. The whole Acropolis was the site on which had been raised a Mycenaean king's palace, a man who was in some way a relation, a vassal, a tribute king to Agamemnon in Mycenae, but nonetheless independent, ruling over this vast landscape of Attica, the region of which Athens is the chief city. This was his palace. He had a gate there that probably was a little bit like the Lion Gate that one sees at Mycenae outside Agamemnon's palace. And the only thing that made the top of the rock sustainable as a place to live was the fact that through the marble and the limestone, there are some clefts that lead down to at least one spring. And so they were able to send the servant girls down those stairs into the cleft and bring up the water. This palace had a patron goddess. We believe her name was Athena, that she goes all the way back to the Bronze Age, the time of the Trojan War, the heroic age. So it was the king of Athens in the Bronze Age who brought Athena to the rock. The king disappeared, the palace disappeared, all kings became reviled. And in fact, in building their Parthenon and the other temples, the classical Athenians wiped out almost every trace of the Mycenaean palace that had been there. Nonetheless, don't forget that foreworld of the Acropolis as the citadel for a mighty monarch at the time of the Trojan War. Now, as we move up the steps toward the Propylaea, we are looking at the building that the Athenians prized almost more than any other that they had created. When they talk about the beauties of the Acropolis, they usually just mention the Propylaea, the gatehouse. Remember, most people didn't go up to the top of the rock on a regular basis. They would stay down in the agora, the marketplace, the sort of open town square. They would be down in the kerameikos, the potter's quarter, or there with the people who were working with bronze. They wouldn't routinely go up on the rock. It was a place for the priestesses, the priests, a set of little girls from noble families who spent a year weaving a new robe for Athena to be put on her statue. Only select people were up there. So the town mainly saw that great glorious gateway and talked about the Propylaea. It's funny to us who make such a cult of the Parthenon that the ancient Athenians really did not. They didn't prize the Parthenon even more than their own naval installations down at the Piraeus, things of very great interest to me as a nautical archaeologist. Those slipways and dockyards for the 400 ships of the Athenian navy, great oared ships with bronze rams, torpedo-like ends. This was their pride and joy. We've only got one reference to the Parthenon in the century in which it was built, and it's from a comic play, and the phrase, it's by a playwright named Eupolis. The phrase that he has written goes, "O Athens, queen of cities, how fair your navy yard, how fair your Parthenon, how fair your Piraeus," the port. So the Parthenon is just a little element in a naval sandwich, kind of a corrective to us who almost worship this building as the emblem of classical Greece. As we approach the Propylaea, we are following the route taken by the people of Athens as they celebrate on that first day of Hekatombeon, Athena's birthday. And they are bringing up their 100 oxen, and they're bringing up offerings of all kind. Everybody in the city, more or less, has a role to play. Even the daughters of resident aliens, non-Athenians, are allowed to bring certain offerings up to Athena in this grand parade. The parade started way down in the agora, snaked its way along. The chief feature of the parade had been a ship on wheels. Athens was a city of the sea. That little peplos, or woven robe that the young noble girls had spent the year embroidering, had been drawn through the city, mounted on the ship's mast, this ship on wheels, the ship's mast as if it were a sail, and then taken down at the foot of the Acropolis and very ceremonially carried up the steps with the population of Athens coming along behind to celebrate Athena's birthday. Let's us now enter the shade of the Propylaea. Off to your left, there was one of the city's many art museums. Athens is one of those places where people for the first time got the idea that art should be public. It shouldn't just be rich people's halls that are ornamented with beautiful paintings. Why not the people? Who is more important than the demos, the people of classical Athens? So one of the places that the people could go in and see great art was right there in the gatehouse, the Propylaea. But you're not going to spend very long. The paintings are gone. You're going to be drawn inexorably forward, both by the press of people behind you, but more by the dazzling light that is showing between those Doric columns as you come out of the Propylaea, the gatehouse, and onto the surface of the Acropolis itself. In front of you is a void, an emptiness. It didn't used to be empty. Long ago, you would have been confronting a bronze statue probably 50 feet high, a sort of a Statue of Liberty figure of Athena, standing so tall there, guarding the Acropolis rock, cast in bronze by the great sculptor Phidias, one of his earliest works. She was holding her spear up, and the sun shining on her spear tip and on her helmet was so dazzling that mariners all the way out at sea could pick it out as a landmark, that glint of the sunlight on the bronze Athena on the top of the Acropolis. She was taken away during the time of the late Roman Empire when the Emperor Constantine was taking artworks from all over his empire to adorn his new city, Constantinople. And what happened to that poor bronze statue there, nobody is sure. She was one feature that originally filled what is now a void in the middle of the rock. But there was another, more important. The original temple of Athena Polias, Athena, goddess of the city, stood dead center in the middle of the rock. But it was destroyed by the Persians, Xerxes, king of Persia, coming down on Athens and taking the evacuated city, abandoned by its people, in 480 BC, gave his Persians order to burn that temple because the Athenians had participated in crossing the Aegean and burning a temple to the mother goddess in Sardis. The burning of this temple left this void, but enough of the temple was left that they didn't want to give up on it. Temples were sacred things even in just the footprint that they occupied. And that temple of the old Athena Polias, enough of it remained that it kept on being part of the cult right through the classical period, right down to the end of the 5th century BC. Similar thing was done in Coventry in England. The cathedral there was bombed by the Germans during World War II, not rebuilt, but the shattered shell left to remind people of what the English had gone through during that terrible time. Now, just as the English did eventually build a new cathedral at Coventry, so the Athenians in the last decade of the 5th century BC did build a replacement temple for the old temple burned by the Persians. And that temple you see on your left as you stand at the inside of the Propylaea looking out over the rock, it is the beautiful, delicate Ionic temple known as the Erechtheum. And its main feature is that lovely porch of maidens in which a number of stone girls, they are in fact priestesses, are acting as caryatids to hold up the roof of a little porch or reviewing stand on which all the priestesses would have stood to watch the grand procession go by with all of the oxen and the other offerings on the day of Athena's birthday. But the void remained in the middle of the Acropolis, a constant reminder of that horrible past when Athens was abandoned and burned, a void that the Athenians never forgot. But you're not going to be looking at this void for very long, because to your right, up a little slope, there is the Parthenon itself, gleaming in the clear light of Greece, standing for everything that we prize most in terms of order, harmony, beauty, rationality, human aspiration. I love the Parthenon dearly, but we need to talk about some ways in which it's not what it appears to be. First of all, you are not looking at the front door. Although everyone inevitably moves forward, as you will too, and takes up a stand with the Parthenon somewhere over their shoulder and gets a stranger or a friend to take their picture, and I urge you to do this, your trip to Greece is not complete without that photo, that's not the front of the Parthenon. That's the back door of the Parthenon. The front is all the way at the other end. We're looking at the west end of the Parthenon. It's oriented to the Propylaea because it's only the west end of the Acropolis that has a gentle enough slope to get the steps up to the gate. The east end, as we will see, is a precipice. People cannot get up that, cannot bring sacrificial animals up it. So the front door is the other end. Second, something you probably already know, it wasn't plain marble. It was garishly colored in blue, in red, in gold, maybe other colors as well. Certainly all the figures on those triangular-shaped gables or pediments, on the frieze that ran around the inside of the porch, and on the metapiece, those little squares that show heroic scenes up at the top of the columns. All these were lavishly, garishly painted. Greeks thought sculptures should look real, should look lifelike. They didn't want the sort of dead, idealized white marble, which we have turned into a sort of a fetish. Now, taking our time on that slippery rock, we're making our way up to the corner of the Parthenon and beginning to walk along its north side, its north colonnade. I want you to reflect, as we do so, on one of the true marvels of this building, and that is the architectural refinements and almost sleight of hand magic that was called into play by Phidias and the architects who built this incredible structure, this fabulous solid marble temple back in the 440s BC. It looks like everything is perfectly straight and perfectly rectangular. Yet there is scarcely a straight line in this entire building. The Greeks realized that straight lines in huge Doric temples gave an impression of heaviness, gave an impression of sagging to the base of the temple, of squatness to the columns. So everything in the Parthenon has been swelled out a little bit in the middle of the columns, or curved upward a bit on what's called the stylobate, the base of the temple. If you put your head down at one end, as an Englishman once did, having left your hat at the other end of that stylobate, you can't see the hat. There's enough of a curve worked out millimeter by millimeter in order to create the illusion of something very light, very perfect in form, but in fact, all curves, all illusions. Also, you'll look up and see fragments of the frieze, not on the outside, but up inside the first set of columns. And when you get to the middle of the temple, you'll see terrible damage. Why is the temple damaged in the middle? Well, there was a terrible explosion in 1687 when the Turks, who had been using the Parthenon as an ammunition store full of gunpowder, were at war with Venetians down on the plain below. Those Venetians had brought artillery with them. They were determined to push the Ottoman Turks out of Greece and claim it for their own. And one of the commanders down on the plain ordered one of his artillerymen to lob a shell into the Parthenon. Unfortunately, they knew there were women and children taking shelter there. They were deliberately trying to kill as many of those people as possible, but also blow up that ammunition. Well, they succeeded. The gunpowder went. That's why the middle of the temple is in terrible shape. The two ends survived relatively unscathed. And fortunately, those sculptures on the ends that showed mythological scenes in the life of Athena, they had been drawn just a few years earlier, before the terrible explosion, by a couple of traveling English artists, so we do have records of what those pediments showed in terms of myths. On the west pediment, the west front that you've already seen, we saw Athena in contest with the god Poseidon for who should be the god of Athens. Poseidon has given a salt spring. He struck the Acropolis with his trident. Salt water has poured forth. I think he was both showing that the Athenians had the sea in their veins and also giving them something very valuable. Salt springs, where you could dry the water and then sell the salt, they were gold mines in the ancient world. What has Athena given? Up there on the west pediment, an olive tree. That basis of the Greek diet and Greek agriculture, and especially in Athens, where they concentrated more on their olive trees than anything else. Olive trees were sacred. To cut down an olive tree was the equivalent of murder. So there she is up on the west end, claiming Attica as her own with this incredibly important gift for the Athenian people. Let's proceed on down to the far end, the east end, and turn and look up at the pediment there. Now we really are looking at the front door of the Parthenon. And we see the scene that is being celebrated today, Athena's birthday on the first day of the month Hekatombeon in summer. Her father Zeus had mated with a very elusive goddess called Metis. Metis is cunning intelligence. Metis is what Odysseus showed when he built the Trojan horse to fool the Trojans into destroying themselves. That's Metis. She tried to get away from Zeus. Zeus, having received a prophecy about her, swallowed her whole. Sometime later, he had a terrible headache. And he asked his one of the younger Olympians, Hephaestus, his wife Hera's son, who was the blacksmith of the gods, to split his head open, anything to get rid of the pain. So what you see or used to see before the big blow-up that knocked down all the statues, you saw the scene, the mythological scene up there on the east pediment that showed Zeus with his head cloven open and Athena, the city's goddess, coming out fully armed like a warrior into the world to become the goddess of wisdom, as her mother had been a goddess of wisdom, and also the goddess of crafts, of ingenuity. Poseidon had made the horse, Athena made the bridle. Poseidon ruled the sea, Athena showed humans how to make ships. She was the goddess of weaving above all, and that was one reason the young girls of Athens brought her each year this new woven robe to be her peplos, her robe for the coming year. Once the procession got to the front of the Parthenon, in a normal temple, it would have made the sacrifice of those 100 oxen right there. But the Parthenon is not a normal temple. It is not, in fact, this is a shock, a temple at all. Temples have to have priests or priestesses. There are no priestesses of the Parthenon. Temples have to have altars, not inside, because you're going to burn offerings on the altar, but outside. Parthenon has no altar. What is the Parthenon? It's a gigantic war trophy for all the Athenian victories from the Persian Wars on down to the time when it was built in the 440s BC. It is a glorification of Pericles and his family, the noble house of the Alcmaeonids, who were great temple builders always, and now felt with Pericles in charge of Athens, first man of Athens, that the family was in its rightful place. And it was a bank, a treasury. The Athenians were ruling an empire of the sea, 150 islands and cities, all paying tribute to Athens. The Athenians had raised the Parthenon with that money, sort of misappropriated naval funds. The allies were paying for protection from the Persian navy. And they kept, the Athenians, the gold and silver bars of the tribute in the west room of the Parthenon. Inside the Parthenon itself was a great statue of Athena, not the holy statue. How do we know it wasn't holy? Because they made its gold plates on its white ivory flesh able to be pulled off and melted down in case they needed the gold for money in times of emergency. No way to treat a goddess. She was one of the wonders of the ancient world, not on the official list of 7, but certainly a miracle of beautiful work. We have an image of her thanks to a souvenir replica that was made in the time of the Roman Empire, but all trace of her is now gone except the little square socket in the floor of the Parthenon where that great statue was anchored. Now, I want you to stand in front of the Parthenon. Chances are you will not be allowed in to the shattered building. They've been restoring it for many more decades than it actually took to build. And there are always cranes and scaffolding and people at work. I want to share one thing with you. They initially restored some of the columns by taking the drums apart, and where there'd been little holes with some kind of a plug to keep the column drums from slipping side to side in earthquakes, they put in iron. Well, the iron was rusting, so they had to take them all apart and put in titanium instead. They've just been doing that in the last few years. One of them they found had never been taken apart. The original plug was there. It was cedar wood, 2,500 years old, and so tight was the join between the column drums that the cedar wood still smelled fresh. 2 millennia and a half after those craftsmen back in the 440s BC had created the work in the first place. What I would like to draw your attention to is above the door. Back behind the main columns is the famous Parthenon frieze, which showed the procession leading up to the Acropolis, all the different people of Athens celebrating their goddess, and then the gods themselves in front of the main door come together, the Olympian gods, Aphrodite, Artemis, Apollo, Zeus, all of them, to celebrate Athena's birthday with her. And you see the folding of the peplos in the middle as the priest takes it and makes ready to offer it to the goddess as a new dress for the new year. But look on the outside, just above the column capitals, and you'll see little clusters of holes all along that architrave. What are they? Each one used to hold a bronze letter. And those bronze letters, they were very precious, anything made of bronze, and were stolen and melted down in the Middle Ages, but they originally spelled out words. Alexander, king, dedicates these shields to the goddess on his behalf and on behalf of the Greeks, except for the Spartans. What's the story behind this? Alexander the Great had won a great battle over near Troy as he was beginning to conquer the Persian Empire. He'd conquered a lot of shields from the enemy, from the Persians, and he did what good generals did in the Greek world. They offered a tithe, a tenth, to a god as thank you for the victory. These shields were sent by Alexander to Athens, one of his allies, not a city he'd conquered, but an ally, a subordinate ally, and ordered these shields, his first great victory in Asia, ordered the shields that commemorated it to be put up in what he thought was the greatest of all Greek memorials, war memorials, the Parthenon across its front. So we see here one of the rare marks of Alexander that has survived in the archaeological record. He went through the world like a meteor, and he left very few traces behind. Now, before you leave the Parthenon, I want you to walk over to the south parapet and look down. Below you is a great building in modern style that is the Acropolis Museum. In the Acropolis Museum, you will see all the sculptures that are from the Parthenon. The ones you see on the Parthenon today are plaster casts. The acid rainfall of Athens is too brutal on marble to let those poor statues stay out and suffer and melt any longer. So this beautiful Acropolis Museum has been created. You will be led through it in the most enchanting way from its lower levels with the most old antiquities up to the top, where you will see, arranged as they would have been on the Acropolis, all the fragments that survived the explosion in 1687, including in white plaster casts the famous Elgin marbles, the Parthenon marbles carried off in the early part of the 1800s by Lord Elgin or his agents, and now one of the chief glories of the British Museum and one of the greatest bones of contention in all of international diplomacy, as the Greeks are most earnestly asking for the originals to come home from London to Athens. Out on the eastern end of the rock, the Acropolis forms something like the prow of a ship. As I said earlier, the precipices fall away from it on either side. If you stand there, you look back toward the Propylaea, across the space originally occupied by the old temple destroyed by the Persians. You look over to that temple, the Erechtheum, delicate in the Ionic style, the one that the Athenians built after the old temple was finally abandoned, to hold the real statue of Athena. So it's the Erechtheum that is the true temple of Athena, not the Parthenon. And I urge you to walk around it, marvel at its delicate grace, its complex design, and admire the little olive tree growing next to it, which is a descendant of the one that Athena originally planted when she claimed Attica for her own. You also look out over the city from that eastern promontory of the Acropolis, and it's a place where there's always a flag flying. And associated with that flag is an extraordinary story. In 1941, Germany conquered Greece. And on a May day, as the Germans entered the city, German troops were sent up to the Acropolis with orders to fly the swastika from that eastern flagpole. There was a Greek soldier on guard. He couldn't fight back. Here was the German army. They ordered him to take down the flag and haul up the swastika in its place. He brought down the flag of Greece. He wrapped it around himself, and before they could stop him, plunged head first over the parapet and died on the rocks below. The Greek resistance to the Germans was born the moment that story spread through the land like wildfire. And about a month later, two young fellows went back and repeated the incredible adventure, though this time hiding, getting the flag down, destroying it, so that the Germans woke up the next day and realized they had a problem on their hands. So whenever I visit the Acropolis, which is as often as I can, I go stand at that east end and hear the flag flapping in the wind over my head, that beautiful blue and white flag of Greece. And it seems to me a symbol of the essence of the Greek character, a symbol of their power of resistance to tyrants, their determination to survive at whatever cost, and above all, a will to win that still prevails even when the enemy is occupying your greatest stronghold. And as I look at those beautiful buildings that we have been walking past, the Propylaea, the Parthenon, the Erechtheum, that whole ensemble that is the quintessence of the classical age, it's not something lofty and pure and high-minded that I get. It's that same will, that same determination to survive through the ages, no matter what the odds may be.